Hey and welcome to Neverwinter with Argon. So in this video I'd like to go over a Paladin tanking build for Module 20, so you can be as survivable as possible. Now this build is for pretty much all party content where you will need a tank to get the attention of all those angry mobs and make sure that you take the damage instead of everybody else. And this shall be an overall build and guide to do so. And with maxing out this build you should be very easily able to go and do the new dungeon that will come out with Module 20 tomorrow. So let's jump straight into things. Fully buffed up, my stats look like this. I have a whole ton of hit points, nearly 1.1 million. Then my defense is capped out at 90% with awareness at 70%. And as for the other stats here, this is what we have, just being over 50% there. So first things first, for those of you who are newer to the Paladin, this is my general setup for when I'm against a whole bunch of mobs. I'm running my Oath Strike, my Sacred Weapon, my Bane, and my Templar's Wrath. Now I only cast Bane whenever I have the free cast from this feat here, Baneful Strikes. And yes, this is my composition of my feats, with there having Sacred Shield to buff up that Sacred Weapon, as we mentioned, Baneful Strikes. Then we have Divine Pursuit, as it's generally a good bit better to get the most divinity regen, along with having Sheltering Light. I prefer it than having the Shield of the Gods, as I generally like to help keep my party members survive, making sure that they're fully HP. Now of course, ideally they wouldn't get hit whatsoever, but no tank is perfect and we generally lose aggro on one or two mobs, and that just can't be helped. So Sheltering Light every now and again is a great help to just keep them fully healed. And then finally, of course, we have our Unyielding Champion, reducing the amount of divinity our tab consumes, along with increasing our maximum hit points. Now, as I mentioned, my daily powers, I'm generally running Shield of Faith just to keep my party members alive and healed up, and then generally Divine Judgment. You can of course use your Radiant Charge for AoE. I just find it just doesn't really do a whole lot, so I generally like to use Divine Judgment on some pesky tanky mob, or as I said before, Shield of Faith to just keep my allies alive. Of course you could be using Divine Protector to buff up your own awareness and give you more tankiness, along with using Heroism to also make you more tanky, increasing that maximum hit points. And you would use these of course if you need to make sure that you're as survivable as possible. Let's say you're going against some mobs or some boss that hits you really hard and you need that extra survivability. And finally, for our class features, we are of course using Composure, but this is only for AoE along with Aura of Vengeance. But again, this is only for AoE. Now when I go against a boss fight, of course I'm switching out Templar's Wrath for Smite, and I'm also switching out Bane for my Binding Oath. Then of course we need to switch to our Divine Challenger to make sure our Smite is a hard taunt there, along with also I like to switch to my Aura of Valor. You can only have your aura at the top slot here, so make sure that is slotted there. So the general playstyle of a tank for while you're against a boss is just, make sure you smite that boss as hard as you can initially, make sure you have the Divine Judgment, and that way you can hold the aggro at the beginning of the fight. It's basically a race against the DPS who can deal the most damage. We do have threat modifiers which allow us to deal effective damage, and it multiplies our damage values by a certain amount, making the boss think we dealt more damage than we actually did and making us keep the aggro. But other than that, you have your smites to fall back on with this Divine Challenger, which has a hard taunt, which will place you 10% above the maximum damage dealt to the target by a single enemy. So that's going to be powers. Now we're going to go and move on to our gear and what stats you ideally want to be having on your tank. So here we are, and my setup is, yes, not ideal in fact. For my headpiece here, I would really like to have the mane of the Manticore, with that Manticore's bite dealing a whole lot of damage when you go and attack the target with a daily power and then he hits you. And if you have that at the beginning of a boss fight for the artifact call, you will deal an immense amount of damage as the effectiveness will be increased by powers such as like the Halaster Blast Scepter or the Wyvern Knives. That will increase your damage, and this will increase that Manticore's bite from the headpiece. So instead of that, I'm just running the Lion Guard one for more item level along with more power whenever my stamina is full. Now also on top of that, ideally I would be running the Wisps of the Shadow Demon. Whenever you receive a critical hit, there is a 10% chance you will increase your maximum hit points by 20% and your defense by 3%. This is a massive buff to survivability, and I highly recommend these boots for any tank. And the main reason is that enemies now have a 50% chance to critically hit you, and we cannot reduce this chance by any means possible except by some weapon enchantment or some special powers. So now I want to move on to our particular statistics we want to have. Now of course we want to have as much item level as possible, as this will result in the amount of maximum hit points we have. We gain an extra 20% hit points, but generally your maximum hit points is your item level multiplied by 10. For tanks it's multiplied by 12. And this gives us this maximum hit point score. Of course you have other things that will add to this. Let's say like our constitution score will give us that extra percentage in maximum hit points, me there having 17.5% extra. So along with that, item level will also contribute directly to your damage, meaning yes, you will deal more damage and you'll be able to have an easier time at holding that aggro. Now in regards to offense stats, these 5 here, I don't recommend focusing on them above your own survivability. Just max out all these defense stats as much as you can get. I will go to the priority when I mention them, and then look at offense stats. You would just have offense stats as a result of, let's say like your weapon would give you 2 offense slots, and you would slot in enchantments there, which would give you more of these offense ratings. So I recommend stacking power and combat advantage as the best to give you more damage, and that would give you more aggro. Now what I have set up here, I can pretty much hold aggro against anybody as long as I'm on the ball. As a paladin tank, it can be a lot more easy because we have this smite. We have the smite, which is a hard taunt which we can fall back on, and we can cast it lots of times. But don't go spamming it, as when you're out of divinity, you're out of divinity and you will have to wait to regen it. Now in an AoE environment, we have Templar's Wrath, which is a huge buff to your aggro, because the multiplier on this, I believe, is still 8. And 8 times 400, that's 3200 magnitude. That's what your enemies think that you've dealt to them whenever you hit them with this. And that's a higher magnitude than anybody's player powers. So with that said, no, there is no reason to go out of your way to stack offense stats to hold aggro. On other tanks, you may need to, let's say on a fighter, but we're talking about the paladin, and we're fortunate in that regard to not have to stack any particular offense stats. But I recommend if you're going to stack any, stack power, then combat advantage, and then you can go look at accuracy, then crit. Now for our defense statistics, you want to get this defense maxed out at 90%. I currently only have it at 90% there when this ring procs up. This platinum ring of the Herald. It will give me 10% more defense when I stand still. But I will also get a huge chunk of more defense when I'm in a party, as I have these Fiend Forged breastplate, which will give me more defense the more players that are in my party. I only have 1000 from that. Well, I get an extra 4000 when I'm in a party, making me above my cap there of my item level. These ratings will be capped out at 50%, as we can see there, and they will be green when they're very close or a little bit above your maximum item level, giving you that maximum 50%, as we can see with my awareness. So after stacking defense, I highly recommend stacking awareness. Awareness will allow you to decrease the damage enemies deal to you through combat advantage. Now because bosses have combat advantage against you all the time, 100% of the time, no matter if they're flanking you or not, and therefore you want to stack this up so you can be more survivable against bosses. Now if you're running content with like next to no bosses, or the bosses are just really easy, you might want to consider stacking other things like crit avoidance and deflect instead of awareness, because generally when you're fighting lots of enemies, you can position yourself so that they don't deal combat advantage to you by always being at the edge of the group of enemies. However, it will force you to move a lot, as you will have to make sure that they aren't flanking either side of you or behind you. So with that said, that is the priority. Max out this defense, get it to around 85%, then look at capping out awareness as high as possible. Even go so far as sacrificing hit points for more awareness rating. After you've got your defense and awareness as high as possible, look at maximizing your hit points. And that's pretty much it. We have no cap on hit points, so you should be able to maximize this out as high as possible, as I have there nearly 1.1 million. Now I only have this generally through my companion and other buffs, which I will go through a little bit later. So that's our statistics. Now we move to the particular gear. Now, as I've mentioned already, you ideally want to be running the Manticore's mane from the Chult Hunts as your main headpiece. Whenever you cast a daily power, you will hit the next target that hits you for 50% of your hit points, and that will be over 500,000 there. And depending on what other debuffs are on the target, you might deal a whole lot more than that. And of course, for our feat, as I also mentioned, make sure to run those Wisps of the Shadow Demon, as that's a huge buff to survivability. Now, finally, the main priority for a tank is literally just to get as high possible item level as you can. And then once you have got that, you may want to look, when you're at endgame, some specific gears that might help you more in survivability. Let's say like these shielded defender vambraces. They are very good for giving you that extra defense stats, the critical avoidance and deflect. However, you will take a little bit of a hit to that defense score. But they give you the advantage whenever you are struck, you will increase your damage, but whenever you strike an enemy, you will consume those stacks and gain up to 5% damage resistance. So this is really good, and if you time it right, you can always have that 5% damage resistance fairly regularly. Then of course, for my breastplate there, my armor, I'm using that Fiend Forged breastplate. It's also called the Infernal Forged breastplate, and it will basically give you more defense the more players are in your party. Now if we look for this new module, we will have a new breastplate of the Forest Guardian's gear from within the Vault of Stars, and this is this breastplate right here. It will give you awareness there as a secondary statistic, and it will also give you the equip power of Leader's Awareness, giving you up to 7,500 more awareness depending on how many party members are in your party. And this is a huge buff for this awareness rating, allowing us to get this capped out nice and easily. You will take a hit to defense, so you may want to switch out to rings like the Ring of the Condemned instead, or even your defending Rings of the Keeper to give you that extra more defense to make sure you have this rating nicely capped out. Now as I have it here, I will have it capped out when I'm in a party. So that's what you want to look at with your gear. Make sure to get as high as possible item level, and then there are a few gear pieces which you may want to equip that give you that extra survivability. On the secondary statistics, try and get defense statistics like the critical avoidance and deflect, but ideally you would have things that would give you bonus awareness. Now I don't really have any there. Then for our weapon set, you ideally want to have the Lionheart set, giving you that extra damage resistance when your stamina decreases, and this is a pretty huge buff. Whenever your stamina is nice and high, whenever you don't take lots of damage, that's when you will have that extra 7.5% extra damage, and you'll be able to hold that aggro a little bit better. So then for my neck and waist set, I'm just running that Lichstone set, and I'm mainly just running it for the extra constitution points to give me that extra con and giving me that extra maximum hit points. Other options are of course, let's say like the reflective set, giving you that extra rune that you will place on the ground whenever you cast a daily power, giving that extra survivability. It's not too useful when you're against lots of mobs because this rune will only be in one specific location and you generally move around, and also the uptime of it is pretty sad. So I like just to run this Lichstone set, gives me that extra hit points and more survivability. It also has the highest item level of any set within the game if you get the +1. Of course, it's pretty expensive. Then for our rings, as I mentioned, I'm running this Platinum Ring of the Herald, just to give me that extra defense when I stand still, but I'm mainly just running it for the extra defense and, of course, that awareness rating. Then for our left ring, I'm running the Ring of the Overwhelmed +5, and this is a huge buff as a ring. It gives you that extra damage resistance up to 10% whenever you're moving for 1 second. So this is really easy to proc up, especially when you're fighting mobs and you generally move around quite a lot. And of course for shirt and pants, again, it's just the highest item level. So now we'll move to enchantments. As I've mentioned before in a recent video, the negation armor enchantment was buffed up. And yes, I generally like to run around with it a lot of the time in most content. The only content I wouldn't run with it is, let's say, in Zariel or in Tower of the Mad Mage, where you might benefit a whole lot more from having something like this Elven Battle enchantment, which gives you the extra stamina regen along with the resistance to stuns, immobilizes, and etc. Otherwise, the negation enchantment is a huge buff, giving you that extra damage resistance. And yes, it doesn't stack on top of defense, and therefore it's a even better buff, as it doesn't have applied to it the same formula as defense does. Then for our weapon enchantment. Now of course, to help your party members deal more damage, the Bronzewood enchantment is really good. But outside of that, let's say you want to run a Paladin healer as well, and you just want one weapon enchantment that's all around decent for a Paladin. Well, you'd be looking at the Vorpal enchantment. It's pretty decent just to give you that extra statistics of critical strike and critical severity. As a tank, this will just help you deal more aggro. Now, of course, you could also run the Holy Avenger. This is, again, not too bad to help heal party members, especially if you're on your healer build, or if you're just on your tank build, it will help buff up their survivability by giving them an insy-wincy bit of defense there, 3%, along with healing them over time. Now, the best enchantment I find for when you're in an AoE environment is this lightning enchantment, where you will have a chance to arc off a bolt of lightning and it will hit nearby enemies. Now this is really good when you're in an AoE environment, you have lots of enemies and you want to hold aggro on all of them. Now it may not be possible to do so, and thus this lightning enchantment will just help to make sure those enemies on the outsides might get actually hit, and therefore you will aggravate them before, let's say, any of your allies do. So for me, it's really good when you're fighting lots of enemies. But normally I just run with the Bronzewood to help my party members kill stuff faster. Now one thing I didn't mention was the Masterwork Weapons. These ones right here. If you have a party of 5 people running these, that's a huge buff, and you're better off running it than the Lionheart, as it would give you that extra 10% outgoing damage, 10% outgoing healing, and 10% damage resistance. It's a huge buff and something I would highly recommend running if you have a coordinated party of friends and you generally run content together. But it's situationally good, and you kind of want people to have this set to run it viably, to make sure you have the most survivability or the most outgoing healing or the most damage. Now of course you could take the sacrifice and run it anyway, and you would buff up their damage or their outgoing healing. Moving on to our defensive enchantments, you can see I'm running a bunch of them are actually tacticals, and this is just to increase that awareness rating. As we can see, it's capped out there. Now that is the priority as a tank. Cap out that defense, that awareness, and then it's on to hit points. As you can see, I also have a radiant here for hit points. Now for what offense enchantments, I say just take the cheapest you can obtain. I'm just running a bunch of radiants. It gives more power, it gives more damage. So last things to mention on gear, make sure in your artifact weapons you have enhanced Oath Strike there, giving you more aggro, along with in your shield. Use this Forte here, it will give you more defense, along with our deflect severity on a Paladin. Of course you can always switch out to something like more stamina regen if you're in long boss fights, like in Trials, like Tower of the Mad Mage or Zariel, and then make sure to stack up either health here or awareness, or perhaps even your defense if you need that. And finally, last thing would be our jewels and our armor kits. Now ideally, as your armor kits, you would run hit points. You would run these major +1, giving that 3,520 more hit points. It's a huge buff. And then for our neck, waist and rings, run with that awareness, giving you 880 more awareness points, and this is again another huge buff to get more of that rating. So that's gear finally completed. Now we'll move on to our race and ability scores. Now all around, the best race would be the Metallic Ancestry Dragonborn, giving you more maximum hit points and thus more survivability. It will also give you a buff to your incoming healing and your outgoing damage. Now alternatively, as a free-to-play character, you could run the human as I'm running right now. You can see my constitution gets buffed up to 35, and this is only because I'm a human and I have put 3 of my points into constitution, and with those points in constitution I'm getting 17.5% more maximum hit points. Along with that, a human will also give you a +1 bonus to all of your offense ratings and defense ratings, giving you 1% more defense, 1% more awareness, 1% more critical avoidance, 1% more deflect, and 1% more deflect severity, which is a huge buff. That's overall a 5% buff to your defense stats. So a human is really good, and I would definitely recommend running it. Alternatively, you can also run like an Aasimar, gives that extra buff to hit points, along with other races such as the dwarf, giving you a buff to your defense. And for those ability scores, as I've shown you already, stack them all in Constitution and Charisma. If you're in a long fight, you might want to take Strength instead to give you that extra stamina regen. So finally, we'll move on to our artifacts. Ideally, you want to have these Storyteller Journals. Now, if you can't manage to obtain the Storyteller Journals, you may want to obtain these newer artifacts like the Golden Memories, giving you hit points and some other stats. Halaster's Blast Scepter is another one there, giving hit points and some other stats. Our Sparkling Fey Emblem, and the new artifact that's come out with Module 20, giving you more hit points and some more stats. And there's also the Erratic Drift Globe, the Sword of Zariel, etc. And they all have higher item level than the Storyteller Journals, which makes them give you more hit points and damage. But the Storyteller Journals have the benefit of giving you that extra power along with maximum hit points, which is a huge buff, along with also giving you an additional hit for weapon damage whenever you critically hit, making it easier to hold aggro. So finally we move on to companions, and these are the ones I'm running here. Now I'm currently running Lulu the Hollyphant, and she's giving me a 5% additional hit points, which is a really big buff for a tank. Alternatively, of course, you can run other companions like the Angel of Protection, which will give you that ward every 60 seconds, which will block half of the incoming damage. It's really good, along with a 5% bonus to your defense. Along with that, you can also run like the Hellmite Paladin Ghost to give you that extra heal, that 3% of your maximum hit points whenever you attack the person who has that seal on them. It's really good for boss fights. Along with that, we also have the Ion Stone of Allure, which will give you the bonus awareness, control resistance, and hit points, which is again another pretty good buff for overall tanking. And then of course we have the Stalwart Lion, and it will give you the benefit of granting your nearby allies stacks of radiant weapon along with yourself, of course, and whenever you stand adjacent to the lion, it will intercept 10% of the damage you take, and this is up 100% of the time, giving you more survivability when you're adjacent to the lion. And these are my top 5 companions that I would run as a paladin tank. Of course, you could also run the dedicated squire. This would be definitely one I would add to this list. Now for our companion gear. You can see I'm running gear which would give you bonus awareness and also defense to help you cap out those ratings. As you can see here, I'm running the platinum cased grimoire of the companion along with some of these chained grimoires of the companion. Now it doesn't really matter which ones you run as long as you help balance out your own stats. Along with that, the runestones I'm mainly running just Recondite and Empowered. Recondite giving that extra awareness and Empowered giving you that extra hit points, and that's pretty much it. Then for our actual slotted companions. Now I am running Redemption here, and it's a pretty huge buff to your heal. It will heal you for 7.5% of your maximum health over 5 seconds. And now with having 1.1 million hit points, or at least up to that, with having Lulu summoned, as we can see right there, this will heal you for quite a lot. Of course, there are other things you could be running, and people will want you to run Armor Break when you're, let's say, in a trial, so you can increase their damage. Now for our companion powers. Ideally in our offense slot there, you would run with the Blink Dog's Presence. It's the only companion power which will give you a buff to 2 defense statistics there, giving you deflect and critical avoidance. Other things will only give you 1 defense stat, and the others will be an offense stat. Then for our other slots here, we have our universal slots along with our defense slot, and we have the Harper Bard giving that hit points and awareness, the War Dog giving awareness and defense, the Frost Mimic giving you defense and awareness, and the Owl giving you hit points and awareness. And that's what I highly recommend running with. With companions complete, we move to our mounts. Now on our mount section here, doesn't particularly matter what you run as the combat power. Generally, when we're running in an AoE environment, I like to run the Vortex from the Flying Carpet. It will suck in enemies, pulling them all close together, and that will help you keep the aggro on them as they will all be close up, and it will help DPS deal a whole lot more damage to them. And then, of course, when you're against a boss, you will be wanting to run powers such as like the King of Spines, some of the T-Rexes, and also Ferocious Roars, another really good one there, reducing the outgoing damage of the target and also hitting them for 800 magnitude. Now, in our equip power there, I'm running Stalwart to give me more maximum hit points. Of course, you could always switch out to one that would give you bonus awareness or even bonus defense if you need those ratings. Now moving to our stable, I highly recommend running Fortitude Insignias. They will give you a bonus to your defense along with a bonus to your maximum hit points, and there's no other insignias which gives you those buffs to those important defense stats. So Fortitude Insignias everywhere is the way to go. Then for our actual insignia bonuses, you want to be running all of the ones that heal you. You can see I'm running Knight's Rebuke, Champion's Return, Barbarian's Revelry, Survivor's Blessing, and Oppressor's Reprieve, all of which will help heal you whenever you meet the certain conditions. Then for our Mount Callers, you want to have them as high as possible, and I have them all there on Mythic. And you want just one there that gives you whatever as your practical. It just gives you item level, which gives you more hit points and more damage. Then for our sturdy one, I highly recommend giving you that extra 5% to your encounters. Of course, you could run the at will one as well, or even the daily power one. It doesn't really matter. Then for our supportive one, I just like to run with the stamina regen. Then for our unified one, I like to run with the movement speed. You could also alternatively run with the incoming healing when you're in a trial. And then for our bottom one there, our wayfaring one, I run with action points gain. You could of course run with recharge speed or critical severity. Doesn't particularly matter as a tank. So that's mounts complete, and we move to boons. Now in our boon tab here, you of course want to get all the hit points as you go along and all of these defense statistics. They will just give you a little boost of a percentage to those stats, and that's about it. Of course, you want to pick up your movement speed, your deflect severity, along with your control resistance, and then you might want to pick up your extra damage and damage resistance against undead, and that again against your fiends. And you may also want to get them against dinosaurs if you're running like Chilton content. For tier 5, I like to run with just more forte. That's 4% more forte, which is really good. 2% of that will go to defense. 1% of that will go to deflect severity. And the other 1% goes to our offense stat there. I believe it's our critical strike. And then your other tier 5, I like to run with second wind, giving that extra stamina regen. Of course, you could run with like action points gain or even recharge speed. Doesn't really matter. For our top boon, just run with focused retaliation. It has been completely nerfed and reduced to the ground compared to what it was. It used to be a really huge buff to holding aggro in, let's say, Zariel. Whenever an enemy would hit you, you would hit them back for pretty much all the damage they were dealing to you. Now, unfortunately, this has been reduced. It will now only give you control resistance, deflect, and deflect severity, and that's about it. Moving to our guild boons, doesn't matter what you take in offense. Defense, I'm just using their awareness. But when I get that chest piece that will give me awareness, I'm going to switch that out to, let's say, like hit points or defense if need be. Then for our utility, highly recommend running Revive Sickness whenever you're running any content where you think you might die. This Revive Sickness will reduce the effect of those skulls on you that reduce your hit points and the damage you deal. So that's pretty much it. Last thing to mention, I believe, would be the buff food. What food am I using to get these stats up? Well, I can show you right here. I'm running these Chain of Scales as my belt item, my main belt item. Whenever we use that, we go ahead and use it. It will buff up that awareness by a total of 3%, and then some other random statistic by 2%. I wouldn't rely on it whatsoever, but the stamina regen of 6% is really nice. Now, the food you want to be running is here. You want to be running Foehammer's Failure Elixir. It will give you that extra deflection and also deflect severity. There's no other elixir there that's going to give you as much survivable buff as this. Then you want to be running Caprice. It buffs up that hit points and deflect. this is again another huge buff, and you want to be running chocolate as your guild food, buffing up that awareness, gets me capped out. And then of course you want to be running an invocation blessing, and I'm running the one there that buffs up my accuracy and awareness, making sure I'm capped out there at 70%. Ideally I get this another 20% higher, but that's pretty much at the maximum I can get just from standing still and not within combat. With this rating capped and the percentages pretty much of other contributions being there 20%, and that's all I can really get. So that's it for the consumables and what I run on a Paladin tank. Now, if I've missed anything, make sure to let me know in the comments below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. If you want to know what the fashion I'm running, here you go. You can just take a quick look right here. Now, hopefully I presented this well, and if I did, consider leaving the video a like, and if you're new around here, consider subscribing. And we'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.